From the WKYT studios in Lexington, this is Kentucky Newsmakers with Bill Bryant.
Good morning from WKYT News. Hope you're making the best of another wintry weekend here in the Bluegrass. Congressman Andy Barr had looked forward to holding all kinds of meetings and talking with people in his district over the last week since Congress was not in session. We all know that the weather got very rough. Some of those get-togethers had to be rescheduled, but Congressman Barr is here with us for WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Time of major issues in Washington and here at home, President Obama is seeking additional authority to use military force against terrorists. Where does the congressman stand on the request from the White House? And he has more to say about that. A federal judge in Texas has halted the Obama administration's policy change on immigration, at least for now. Some Republicans say that will be considered as they look at funding for the Department of Homeland Security and some other things. Congressman Barr is on the Kentucky bourbon bandwagon, promising some legislation in Washington that would change one of Kentucky's signature products as far as how it is taxed at the federal level. And Barr's work as a majority member of the Financial Services Committee has him pressing for easing the rules on community banks and credit unions. Congressman Andy Barr with us today on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Good to have you.
Good morning. Good to be back with you. Thank you. Hope you're staying warm.
Well, and you as well. And I know you did really have to alter things this week. You had big plans in the district, right?
We did. We had an invitation for the director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy to come to Kentucky. He was scheduled to visit the SOAR meeting on Monday and then visit with a number of central Kentucky stakeholders who obviously share our concern about the heroin epidemic. Unfortunately, those plans had to be changed because of the weather.
And did you make some other meetings?
We've tried to fill in the gaps where we can, and we have a big day ahead of us today, so we're going to continue to work while we're home.
Let's begin with this pressing international question. What does the United States do going forward to deal with terrorism? There have been major attacks in other countries and attempts here, and President Obama is asking Congress for the authority to use military force. Where do you stand on that?
These are serious times, Bill. The objective of our country, our national security objective, should be, I believe, to degrade and defeat and destroy the Islamic State. What we've learned from history is that when Islamic terrorists are not confronted, when we do not push back against their growth, these terrorists grow, their influence grows, and this cancer on humanity metastasizes, and it becomes a greater threat to the United States, our homeland, and our allies. And we've seen that this is the case because when the president withdrew from Iraq in 2011, defied the advice of his military commanders, refused to leave a sufficient residual force in place. And when he withdrew diplomatically and left the Maliki government to its own devices, what happened was that created a huge void that alienated the Sunnis and resulted in the rise of this new threat, which frankly is more dangerous and more threatening to the West and our interests than even Al-Qaeda was prior to 9/11. And so we have no choice. We have to accept the world as it is, not as we would hope it to be. And so I agree that the strategy must be to degrade and defeat the Islamic State. You alluded to the fact that the president has sent to Congress a request for authorization for use of military force. I agree that the country is stronger, that our response will be stronger if the Congress works with the Commander-in-Chief to give him those authorities, to give our military leadership all of the flexibility and the authorities they need.
Will you vote for his resolution?
Well, the problem with the president's request is that it asks the Congress to tie the Commander-in-Chief's hands. It sets arbitrary timetables. It limits the options available to our military commanders. And my views on this are informed by briefings that we have received in Congress from our military commanders, from intelligence officials, who tell us that the president's request is insufficient to achieve the objective of victory. It's insufficient to achieve our objective. And so I will not vote for the authorization as it has come to us because, again, it places limitations and it would make Congress complicit in a strategy that our military commanders say would lead to failure. So this is the start of the process. It's not the end of the process. The president sending us this draft authorization. We're going to be holding robust oversight hearings in the Congress, and we're going to send, if we send him an authorization, it will be one that doesn't tie his hands.
So let me ask this. You're saying then that you would basically remove Congress from the equation. It would be his decision or the decision of his successor.
Well, no, not at all. I don't agree with that characterization. Congress has an important role to play, an important oversight role to play. We have the power of the purse. We would have to fund and finance any kind of campaign that would be there. But what we don't want to do is telegraph to our enemies what we're not going to do. What we shouldn't be doing, according to the military commanders like General Keane, who has come before the Congress and testified, like General Mattis, the veterans of the counterinsurgency effort in the Iraq War. What they tell us is that we need a ground presence. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean another U.S. occupation force. It doesn't necessarily mean a repeat of the Iraq ground campaign from the 2000s. But what it does mean is that we need to have a ground counteroffensive to ISIL to remove them, to counter the narrative that they're winning the war. We need to collaborate with our air forces and the indigenous ground forces, the Kurdish Peshmerga, the Iraqi army, the Sunni tribes, the Shia militia. We need to help them and coordinate with them, and that may mean U.S. special operators on the ground to coordinate with our air campaign.
What are your thoughts about this operation that apparently is going to happen next week, Iraqi-led but U.S.-backed, apparently in an attempt to take back Mosul?
Well, we absolutely have to do that. As I say, what history teaches us is that when we leave this Islamic terrorist threat to its own devices, it grows, it metastasizes. We have to have a counteroffensive. Our homeland security depends on it. Our national security depends on it. So we need to support an effort to roll back their territorial gains. Part of this also is countering the narrative that the terrorists are winning and that they're growing. And we need moral clarity from our commander-in-chief. And what is unhelpful is this political correctness. What is unhelpful is these statements that we're not at war with Islamic terrorism. There needs to be an acknowledgement that there is a real struggle within the Muslim world between moderation and religious tolerance and this evil, toxic religious intolerance that says that if you're a moderate Muslim, if you're a Jew, if you're a Christian, then you should have your head cut off, or you should be burned alive, or would allow for school children to be gunned down. This is the kind of evil that we haven't seen in the world since the Holocaust in Nazi Germany. And the civilized world needs to stand up and be prepared to push back against this kind of evil intolerance.
Congressman, what could you support then, if not the current approach that the president has come forward with and says that he would want these reports to Congress to be regular? What could you support in terms of White House policy?
Well, what we need, again, is moral clarity from the commander-in-chief, who is, instead of talking about apologizing for Christians during the crusade, during the national prayer breakfast.
Do you want that to be part of, written into any resolution?
Well, you know, what we need to do as a Congress is encourage the president to do what he needs to do and talk about this in terms of this evil ideology that is Islamic radical terrorism. And when you can't even say what the enemy is, when you can't even identify the enemy as radical Islamic extremism, and you refuse to use that phrase, how can you expect to defeat that enemy? So part of it is pushing back on the evil ideology as much as it is killing and capturing terrorists. But the other part of it is don't send to Congress an authorization for use of military force that ties your own hands, that says to the enemy, we're not really committed, we're not prepared to be in this fight for the long run. We shouldn't be tying the commander-in-chief's hands and the next commander-in-chief. So I will support authorization, but I want an authorization that will support a strategy for victory.
And you anticipate the next few weeks this will all be hashed out?
That's right. We're going to be holding hearings in the Intelligence Committee, in the Armed Services Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, and we will finish this process. This is the beginning of the process, and if we send the president an authorization, it will be an authorization that gives him the tools and the military commanders the flexibility and the authorities they need to carry out this mission with victory.
The new Congress includes majorities for Republicans in both the U.S. Senate and in the House at this point. The Republicans are in control of the legislative branch now. Do you see your party being effective in governing from that position?
You know, we enjoy the largest Republican majority since 1928, but I think one of the reasons why Republicans were swept in and why, frankly, I was able to win a landslide victory in November was not just because the American people want Republicans in charge. It's because the American people want the Congress and the president to fix big problems. They want us to get results for the American people, to solve these challenges facing our country. And they've been frustrated with the lack of results coming out of Washington. And so what have we done as a Republican majority in the first 6 weeks? We have had an extraordinarily productive session where we've passed 42 bills, all of them but one, bipartisan bills, and we've sent them over to the Senate. Bills like the Save American Workers Act, which would restore the 40-hour work week under Obamacare. The Hire More Heroes Act, which would exempt veterans who have health care from the VA or TRICARE from the employer mandate to allow employers to hire more veterans. The Keystone XL pipeline, which is going to the president's desk next week. The liquid natural gas exports bill. A bill to streamline permitting for natural gas pipelines, regulatory relief, tax reform, small business tax reform that we've passed, 12 anti-human trafficking bills. Most of these bills, 41 out of the 42, are bipartisan bills. We are doing the job that the American people elected us to do, and we've sent these bipartisan solutions over to the Senate, and we want the Senate to act and send those bills to the president's desk.
Do you urge the president not to veto the Keystone XL pipeline bill, as Senator McConnell evidently has done, because even with your strong majorities, you do not have the votes to override the veto?
Well, we don't, but we have large bipartisan majorities in both the House and the Senate. Not enough to override the veto, but this is a bill that is overwhelmingly supported by the American people. It would create 42,000 new jobs overnight. It would decrease our need to import petroleum from the Middle East, which has geopolitical implications as well. The Keystone XL pipeline would deliver the same amount of petroleum to our refineries on the Gulf Coast as 36% of the petroleum imports annually from the Persian Gulf region. So this is about jobs. It's about national security. It's about energy security. It's a no-brainer. It's supported by the American people, and it's bipartisan and bicameral.
Do you ask the president not to veto it?
We absolutely ask the president to sign this because this is, again, what the American people want, bipartisan solutions that will help the American economy. And unfortunately, the president has shown in the first 6 weeks of this new Congress more of an interest in obstruction than compromise, and these veto threats don't help.
One piece of legislation that was signed by the president early on, passed by both chambers, has to do with suicides by our former military members.
Absolutely. Right? We have an epidemic in this country with veteran suicide, and so we passed out of the House the Clay Hunt Suicide Prevention Act for America's Veterans Act. That bill was passed by the Senate, and fortunately the president did sign that into law. We want to continue to encourage the president to sign these bipartisan solutions that are going to come to his desk.
Congressman Andy Barr, Republican of the 6th District here in Kentucky, our guest on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Back with a lot more questions in just a moment. Hope you'll stay here with us. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Good to have you with us as we visit with one of Kentucky's leaders today, and that is Congressman Andy Barr, Republican of Central Kentucky, as we continue to discuss all of the happenings in Washington. And it has been a busy start to this new Congress. Do you like the new Congress? Have you met some of the new members?
Yes, I have. We've got great new members, actually, and new members that I serve with that I think are adding to the diversity majority of our Congress. Mia Love, first African-American female in the Republican conference, serves with me on the House Financial Services Committee. She's a dynamic new voice for our party. Also, Elise Stefanik. Elise is the youngest woman ever elected to Congress, and she's a dynamic new leader as well. So we're excited about this large majority, again, mostly because we think we have an opportunity to deliver solutions for the American people.
Do you have any Democrat friends up there?
A lot, actually, and I am part of a bipartisan breakfast group, and this group gets together once a week. We talk about solutions that we can work on together, and frankly, that's why we've been so successful at the first start of this Congress, passing 42 bills, 41 of which are bipartisan bills. But this working group that I'm a part of is an opportunity for us to share ideas about how we can move legislation for the American people.
What's the one that's not bipartisan? You knew I was eventually going to ask that, right?
Oh, the one is the repeal of Obamacare, as you may expect.
Which you have voted to repeal several times, and as you know, Governor Beshear, who expanded Medicaid here in Kentucky, says that this has been a boon to the economy. He says that the results are positive, more people are insured, and that all is well. You know,
I read in the New York Times recently, Governor Beshear quoted as saying that the Medicaid expansion is working, and that this Deloitte study that he continues to cite is proof that Kentucky can indeed afford to take care of its people. Well, from discussions I've had with my constituents, with all due respect, they don't want the government to take care of them. They want to be able to take care of themselves. They want to be able to take care of themselves and their families. And I don't think we should be celebrating a report that says that by the year 2021, American taxpayer or Kentucky taxpayers are going to have to foot the bill for an additional $363 million a year. It's hard enough for hardworking Kentucky taxpayers to take care of themselves and their families and to provide health insurance for them and themselves and their families, let alone to take on a new tax burden of nearly $400 million a year and call that success. You know, the Supreme Court is going to take up this issue of Obamacare again this summer in a case called King versus Burwell. And in that case, the Supreme Court is going to decide whether or not the 37 states that use a federal exchange, whether or not those subsidies will be allowed to continue. And if the Supreme Court, as I believe that it will, strikes that down, it means that for those people in those 37 states, the true cost of Obamacare will be exposed. And I think
you're saying, in other words, it would have to be borne by the state then.
Well,
right?
It's going to have to be borne by the people. You know, Obamacare is a massive tax on the middle class in this country. The individual mandate, the tax penalties that Kentuckians are now going to have to face this coming tax season. A lot of my constituents are already surprised to see that their tax bills are going up because of Obamacare. But the Congress needs to have a response, a bipartisan response to a very partisan bill, Obamacare. We need a bipartisan solution that will, instead of expanding the government, instead of expanding Medicaid and putting more burdens on the taxpayers and putting people into government ration care, which is unfortunately what this Kentucky Medicaid expansion is, what we need to do is make it easier for those people who, many of whom lost their high-quality private health insurance that was provided by employers, and now they're in this government Medicaid that the politicians in Frankfurt are touting as a success. What we need to do after King versus Burwell is for both the states that have exchanges like Kentucky and those states that are on the federal exchange, we need to give those people an alternative that will make it more affordable to get better health care on a more affordable basis. So individual tax credits, so that people can escape these Medicaid exchanges and go get high-quality private health insurance where there won't be waiting lines and where it will also be affordable.
Do you think that would take some people off of the health care rolls who have it at this point?
Well, I think it will continue to expand coverage. Look, I think it's a good thing that the uninsured rates have come down. That is a positive thing. And for individuals who have had pre-existing conditions, who have Medicaid coverage for the first time, that's great.
But it's by and large down because of the expansion of Medicaid.
Well,
right?
And also because they've forced a lot of these people out of private health insurance. But what I would say to those people who for the first time have Medicaid coverage, I want better for them. I don't want them to be in a waiting line. I want them to have high-quality private health insurance that is affordable through a tax credit. So let's do something better for those people. Let's have continuous coverage requirements so that there's no pre-existing condition discrimination. We can solve those problems, but we can do it in a way that doesn't cost Kentuckians an additional $400 million a year and doesn't do it in a way that rations health care for people. And let's not have this mentality that the government can take care or afford to take care of our people. Let's allow the people of Kentucky to be able to take care of themselves.
A Texas federal judge has put on hold the president's immigration policy that would have allowed some illegal immigrants to start applying for legal status. The White House says it will appeal that ruling. Do you agree or disagree with that judge's ruling?
I think the judge got it right. I think that the judge made a decision that, in fact, the President of the United States himself said for 22 times before this unconstitutional executive order, which is that the President does not have the power under the Constitution to rewrite federal immigration law without Congress. The American people oppose overwhelmingly this President's unilateral executive order granting amnesty to 5 million undocumented people in this country. It does great violence to the Constitution because it undermines the separation of powers between the Congress and the President, and it violates the President's duty under the Constitution to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. The bottom line here is that we need immigration reform, and this sets us back. The President's unilateral executive order sets us back because the President here is making a huge executive power grab and trying to rewrite the laws without going through Congress.
As you know, he says that he waited for years for Congress to do something and there was no action.
Well, to be fair, Congress does need to act on this. I agree with that. But this is setting us back even further. You know, what the American people want in immigration reform is immigration reform that honors our country as a nation of laws and immigrants. We are a nation of immigrants, but we're also a nation of laws. The reason why so many people want to come to this country is because of our constitutional system. And if we cease to have separation of powers, and if the President can simply change the law unilaterally without going through Congress, then we're undermining the very benefits that this country offers to legal immigrants. And I would also say that this unconstitutional executive order that the President has signed is unfair most of all to those hard-working legal immigrants who have come to this country the right way and whose very processing fees, the fees that they pay to stand in line, to do it the right way, to come to this country, their fees are now being diverted to allow undocumented people who have come to this country illegally to cut in line. That's most unfair to the legal immigrants who have come to this country the right way. So we did the right thing in the House to fund the Department of Homeland Security, but defund the President's unlawful executive order. And I think this federal court in Texas got it right.
Congressman Andy Barr, our guest on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. More issues to go. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. We're continuing. Congressman Andy Barr, Republican of Central Kentucky, our guest. In your position on the Financial Services Committee, you touch a lot of issues. You're planning to reintroduce some legislation that would loosen up the rules on community banks and credit unions, right? And I take it the pushback on that is the concern about what happened in 2008 when it was kind of the Wild West in the financial area.
Well, Dodd-Frank doesn't fix what caused the financial crisis. It doesn't do anything to prevent Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac from buying all of these subprime mortgages. But what my legislation would do, which is a bipartisan bill, would actually encourage one of the policies that's in the Dodd-Frank law, which is risk retention. It's called the Portfolio Lending and Mortgage Access Act, which allows our community banks, which were not the cause of the financial crisis, to expand access to responsible mortgage credit. But instead of doing what happened in the run-up to the financial crisis, selling subprime mortgages into the secondary market, into Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and into Wall Street, it requires these banks to escape the burdensome rules of Washington, but retain the risk on their books. And that'll make sure that banks, when they originate mortgages, they'll do so in a responsible way and make sure that they're properly underwritten.
An attempt to loosen up credit. One of Kentucky's signature industries is bourbon, and you're interested in changing the way that's taxed at the federal level, right?
Absolutely. It's the Aged Distilled Spirits Competitiveness Act. We have a bipartisan support for this bill, which would level the playing field for aged distilled spirits like bourbon, which currently is discriminated against in our tax code. We would allow bourbon distillers to write off the cost of distilling the bourbon when it goes in the barrel as opposed to when it goes into the bottle.
Quick answer. The Republican governor of Ohio, Democratic governor of Kentucky say the Brent Spence Bridge cannot be done without tolls. Do you agree?
Well, when I was talking about that bipartisan working group that I'm a part of, one of the initiatives of that bipartisan working group is tax reform that would allow for repatriation of foreign earnings that would help finance a long-term 6-year road plan. We can do this with a federal road plan through international tax reform. We could rebuild the Brent Spence Bridge without tolls. We can finance our infrastructure through international tax reform.
Lexington Mayor Jim Gray sort of sidestepped a question here last week about whether he's interested in the Democratic nomination for Congress next year. What is your reaction to his potential interest?
Well, you know what? We are focused on doing the job we were elected to do. We were blessed with a landslide victory, a 20-point victory, 50,000 vote victory in the last election. And I think that's a credit to the hard work of my team, of the staff that does the work of accessibility and staying in touch with our constituents and doing the constituent service and, frankly, working on these solutions, many of them bipartisan solutions that put the people of Kentucky and their priorities as our priorities. And if we focus on doing the job we were elected to do, the politics will take care of itself.
Congressman Andy Barr, thank you. We appreciate very much you coming in today.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for joining us for WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. We've had a rough week in weather. Hopefully things will start to settle down, but we'll keep you informed on what's going on WKYT News. Of course, we begin bright and early at 4:30 a.m. weekdays. Have a good week ahead.